There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. When the wine ran short, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it. And when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine, without knowing where it came from, although the servers who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves good wine first, and then when people have drunk freely, an inferior one. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord. I was a high school chaplain for 4 years, and in that 4 years, which I totally loved, I got to walk alongside a lot of teenagers just as they navigated those years of their life. And one of the unintended consequences that I saw was just what broken families do to children and how they carry that with them and how that goes into their teenage years and goes into their adulthood. And if you look at stats about America, about 1 out of every 2 marriages ends in divorce. And a lot of young people now, when they poll them, are not choosing to get married at all. They just don't see the value or purpose of what marriage is and what marriage is for. And even of the 50% that stay together, the question is, are those marriages merely surviving or are they thriving? Are they really a community of life and love? So I think it would be fair to say in our culture that we have a crisis concerning marriage. Something is fundamentally wrong. And I'll say the solution to the marriage and family situation culture, in our culture, is what the church teaches us, of course, and also what the gospel reveals today. First, I want to ask, why is marriage so important? Well, the first thing is that you cannot have a strong culture without having strong families and marriages. Marriage is the foundation of family, and family is the building block of society. And so it's simply impossible to have one without the other. Trying to have a strong culture without having a strong marriage and family culture, it's like trying to build a strong house with styrofoam bricks. It's just not going to work. You just don't have the materials. You don't have the goods. As John Paul II once famously said, "So goes the family, so goes the nation." If you want to save America, you want to save the family. If you want to lose America, you want to lose the family. Because that's where it starts, with marriage and family. That's the building block of society. So what is marriage? Well, marriage is the exclusive, permanent, lifelong union between one man and one woman for their holiness and the procreation and education of children. That's what marriage is. And more than that, the love between a man and a woman in marriage is to be an image or an icon or a sign of Christ's love for the church. It's supposed to point to that eternal reality. When 2 baptized people get married, it's a sacrament. And a sacrament, of course, is when God uses something natural to transmit supernatural life or power or grace. And so through the natural union between a man and a woman, both baptized, it becomes an image or an icon of Jesus' love for the church. Why is that such a big deal? I never thought you'd ask. Let's imagine you're going on a trip from Tucson to Phoenix, and you're following the signs. The sign says, Phoenix, 142 miles. Driving. Later it says, Phoenix, 88 miles. Later you see another sign that says, Phoenix, 42 miles. And finally one time you're going to see a sign that says, welcome to Phoenix. And then once you get into Phoenix, you no longer see signs because you're experiencing the reality of Phoenix itself. But if those signs were broken, or somebody took them down, or they scratched them, or they pointed them in the wrong direction, you may never find your way home. If marriage is a sign or an icon or an image that points to Christ's love for our church, and that sign becomes darkened or broken or fuzzy, we may never find our way home. our home to heaven. That's why the stakes are so high. That's why John Paul II once said, arguments about marriage and family are really arguments about the very purpose and meaning of human life. Why do I exist? Why am I here? What was I made for? Marriage is a sign that points to the fact that we're made for union with God for all of eternity. So the first thing that we'd have to say to reclaim this marriage culture is that God is the author of marriage. God is the author of marriage. It's a very simple point, but it's so crucial. Marriage existed in 1911, which means that Arizona didn't create it, because Arizona didn't exist until 1912. Marriage existed in 1775, which means America didn't invent it or create it, because America didn't exist until 1776. God is the author of marriage. A-U-T-H-O-R, the one and only author. It was his idea. He invented it, which means he's the only one who has the A-U-T-H-O-R-I-T-Y. He's the only one who has the authority to tell us what marriage is and what it's for and how it's best lived. He and he alone. And marriage will always go best when we follow God's plan for marriage. And think about our gospel today. This is the first miracle in John's gospel. It's not an exorcism. It's not a miraculous healing. It's not Jesus raising somebody from the dead. His first miracle in John's gospel is at a wedding. And his miracle is turning water into wine. Oh, the Lord was Catholic. Come on. Okay. That's amazing. His first miracle is at a wedding where he turns water into wine. Isn't that interesting? And of course, there's a crisis at this wedding. Jewish weddings were a week long, so you can imagine there was a lot of wine drunks, a lot of food, and they run out of wine. And so Mary goes to Jesus, and she just declares that to him. They are out of wine, with, of course, an implicit invitation to do something about it. And he says, woman, what is this concern to me? It literally says in Greek, what is this to you and to me? In other words, what does this situation have to do with us? He says, my hour has not yet come. It's not time for me to reveal myself. But of course, he accedes to his mother's request, and he ends up doing it, turning the water into the wine, 180 gallons worth. And then when the head waiter tastes it, he says, most people serve the best at the beginning, but you have saved the best for last. And what Jesus is also revealing himself as the bridegroom of the church. Do you remember how Eve was made in the Old Testament? Adam is put to sleep. His rib is taken out of his side. And out of that is built his wife, his bride, which is Eve. How does Jesus die in John's gospel? In the gospel today, he says to Mary, my hour has not yet come. But later in John's gospel, he says, my hour is now here. And then he's going to give himself on the cross. What's going to happen? John says he's going to be put into the sleep of death. His side is going to be punctured. Blood and water are going to come out. The two great signs of baptism in the Eucharist. And out of that is going to be formed his bride, which is the church. Whew. That's why the love between a man and woman is a sign pointing to Christ's love for the church. And Jesus is revealing himself as the perfect bridegroom to his bride, which is you and I, the church. And he gives us his life and love through the sacraments. And just like a good husband and father lays down his life for his bride and his children, so Jesus, the perfect bridegroom, lays down his life for his bride and his children. And that's what he's done for us on the cross, by dying for us, by rising to new life. And this is beginning to be revealed at the wedding feast at Cana. Friends, it's very simple. If we want to fix the problem, the crisis of marriage and family in our culture, we simply need to return to God's plan. God is the author of marriage. He has the authority to tell us what it's for. And if we follow his plan for family and marriage, so many things would be healed. Our hearts would change, the culture would change, our laws would change. Things like no-fault divorce would go away. The proliferation of contraception, we'd see a new desire for a generosity for human life. The proliferation of pornography, redefining marriage being other than between a man or a woman, the eradication of abortion, all of these things are both symptoms of a deeper problem, which we don't understand what family and marriage is for. We've gotten away from God's plan. We have to return to his plan humbly, asking him to turn our water into wine. In other words, asking him to transform it. And Jesus turns water into wine in the gospel today. And wine, later in Acts of the Apostles, will be what the early apostles are accused of right after Pentecost. Holy Spirit falls. They are filled with the Holy Spirit. they're praying, they're speaking in tongues they don't know, and somebody writes it off by saying, they've had too much wine. It's a sign of the Holy Spirit, an intoxication of the life and love of God. And that's what the Lord wants for every marriage. You know, I have 5 siblings, 4 of them are married. And just seeing marriage up close, a marriage requires heroism because the spouses are trying to become saints. I have a distinct memory of one of my sisters. I was at her house, and she was holding like a toddler. With her right leg, there was like a baby like rocker on the floor, and she was rocking with her right foot. She was stirring food with her right hand, and she was yelling at one of her other kids, "Hey, put that down." And I was like, this is amazing. There's a lot going on right now in this room. And when we turn to God's plan for marriage, when I've been around couples that are open and generous to God's life and love, there's kind of it's a beautiful chaos. It's not perfect. God does not ask us to have perfect marriage. He's asked us to have holy ones. He wants us to give our marriages to Him. And if we feel called to marriage, again, if you feel God is calling you to marriage and you're a young person discerning it, the best person to marry would be another saint. That's who you want to marry, a saint. They're the best people to marry. Of course, the challenge is a saint is only going to be attracted to another saint. So if you want to marry one, you have to be becoming one. You have to be eradicating selfishness out of your own life, so you're preparing your heart to lay down your life for your bride, to lay down your life for your husband. I want to close by saying, if we come from a broken family, there can be a great fear that we can't avoid it. In other words, that I'm going to bring this into my next. If I decide to get married and I come from a broken family, how do I not know that I'm just going to perpetuate this cycle? And recently I was reading a book on healing, and this man did not have a real present father. And as he was praying about that with this fear, the Lord told him, "I am the father to the fatherless." That's what he said to his heart. I am the father to the fatherless. In any way that you feel that you've been broken through your own family, we can go to the Lord and He will transform us. That's who He is. God does not ask us to perfect marriages, but holy ones. And holy ones are the ones that are dependent on the Lord, who will give him the wine of their marriage, to give him the water of their marriage so that he would receive the wine of His life.